Uh, yes, I guess we can start, sir, if you are
Okay.
if you are ready.
All right. Okay. So hello, everyone.
Mohan,
Um,
sir.
yeah, I am
Yeah.
about to start.
So
Yeah.
so yeah. So You want me to introduce you, or I'll
Uh,
do the formal introduction on Wednesday. So I just say a quick word to all the participants. Like I mentioned, uh, Mohan sir was detained in Chennai unforeseen circumstances. So that's why we. So the today's part he'll be doing. It's titled Core Competencies. It's an introduction to everything that he's be teaching for the next few weeks. Uh, so um, so because of the unforeseen circumstances, only today's class will be online, and then there will be a compensatory class that we will have on Wednesday, the extramural hours from 11 to 1. Okay, so I'll introduce Mohan sir in much more detail when we meet on Wednesday. Mohan sir, page is all
okay.
yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Though on Wednesday there might not be much more to say about me. You know, I haven't had that glittering a career. In any case, let's uh, go to the second slide. So, so I've been teaching this course for about 20 years now, and one of the things that I have learned in my teaching career is that all the details like the mathematics, the matrix transformations, the coding, object oriented programming versus Python versus none of those matter. If you don't have first of all the motivation for an area, and secondly you don't, on the technical side, see, the motivation is from the heart, and on the technical side, if you don't understand a topic at a high level, without the details, and the details will mean nothing. And you're going to hate your job and life for the rest of your career. So this is about, first of all, the first package deals with the structure of autonomous mobility robotics as it stands today. And the second one is about motivation. Part two is about motivation. So these are two key ingredients when you get into any area. So autonomous has a variety of interpretations. People often read into it what they want to at any given time. So let's pin that down exactly what the terminology means. So the word in all its glory means, full autonomy. That's what we mean by autonomous, just like a human being or an animal. Autonomous within our domains, dogs cannot read. So in that sense, they're limited, but within what they can do, they're fully autonomous. So the driverless car is the best example of full autonomy. Uh, Recently has received a couple of setbacks purely because, well, the technology isn't there. And secondly, the way uh, capitalism works, profit loss and stock values and so on, you do not have an infinite amount of time to spend money without producing a product that can be sold. So that's where they are right now. They have, it's a bit of a setback, but it's not going to die anytime soon. So semi-autonomous is what we have now, to be perfectly honest, because full autonomy is like a dream, a distant dream that someday, maybe 20 years from now, might be realized. So ADAS is the terminology used for whatever features are built into many cars these days, even low-end cars in Western countries. And ADAS stands for Advanced Driver Assistance Systems. And within that category, you have things like maintaining a lane on its own without driver intervention, being able to change a lane. That's a little bit more difficult than lane maintenance. And then you have adaptive cruise control, whereas in the old days, you would have to kick out of cruise control and kick back in when the car ahead, closed its distance to you. And then there's emergency stop, which is relatively easy to conceive. If the car ahead has come to a dead stop, then the brakes come on its own. The human being cannot react that fast in most situations. And then, of course, parking, that is quite an interesting application because most of us, I don't want to speak on behalf of you, but most of us are not that great at parallel parking. Particularly in the small spaces you have in Europe, it's quite an achievement. And then in between the two, you have something called sliding autonomy, where the human being can use his own immense powers of autonomy to help the vehicle uh, when it needs it. So I believe that there's a model that's being tested out in the UK at least, or maybe even in the US, where you have these big 18-wheelers. We call them 18-wheelers because they have 18 wheels and they carry a lot of cargo. And essentially, they are on their own because driving on the freeways is much easier than driving in the city. And they are generally on their own, but they are being monitored at a central station. And the human operator, comes in when the truck is stuck in difficult conditions. The software cannot overcome it, and then the human being literally, in a joystick mode, guides the 18-wheeler past that trouble spot and then, puts it back in autonomous mode. So it appears that mode of operation is more likely to be developed rather than the full autonomy. Okay, so this is a slide that describes SAE, that is the Society of Automotive Engineers, formal categorization of uh, levels of autonomy. Because when you work on a product, you can't just have your own terminology. We all have to have a common understanding of levels of achievement. So you have level 0, which is no automation at all. So that is the car of old. And then you have level 1, driver assistance. Drivers largely responsible for speeding up, braking, environmental awareness, etc. Vehicle provides some help. Example, if car ahead slows down suddenly, and so it goes all the way to level 5, which is full automation. So you can read through that. It's an SAE standard. The formal standard will be on the next slide. Where we are right now is probably between level 2 and level 3. Though Elon Musk will claim that he has a level 3 car in his Tesla, but that's really not true. That's marketing. So the bigger problem is that people who buy his cars think that they are at level 5 because he says that they are at level 5. So that can be dangerous for your life, as several cases have revealed. So that's where we are right now, between level 2 and level 3. Okay, so that's the formal chart. And it says the same thing, except that it's got some intricate interpretations. You can go through it. The print is small. I don't want to spend time doing that. But you can see that there is a clear delineation in terms of color between level 2 and then level 3 to 5. So level 0 to level 2 is in blue and level 3 to 5 is in green. And you have to read the fine print to understand the nuances of how they did this. All right. So again, in terms of structuring the field that you're interested in, the world of robotics is divided into two areas. One is traditional, has been around, I would take a wild guess, since the 50s or 60s. We've had these robots, robot actuators on the assembly line, spot welding, and doing various other things that the old concept of Henry Ford and the way he changed the way something was manufactured. That is, the part itself moves on a conveyor belt and the human being is rooted to a spot. So those have been around for many, many years. I think they're called robot manipulators. The idea is that these don't move except the arms move. The base is fixed, is what I meant. So let's quickly compare that versus the mobile robot. So you do see a picture of a mobile robot, the bottom of the stack of two pictures. And that's a little bit confusing because it has a robot actuator on top of it. But imagine that, we remove the robot actuator. So then you have, what would be considered a mobile robot. So let's compare the two categories. And by the way, on the right, you have a humanoid. So that is the vanity of human beings. We like to see robots that look like us. And that is, I believe, Honda's Simo robot. So it stands up and therefore has to balance, which adds a level of difficulty. So let's compare the two. So manipulators have many more degrees of freedom because of the multiple joints. And the best way to look at it is to use one hand, one of our hands as an example. I believe it has something like 23 degrees of freedom with all the knuckles and fingers and the wrist joint and so on. There are 23 degrees of freedom. And of course, when you have that many degrees of freedom, it's so much harder to control. So you often have to ask yourself, do I really need that many degrees of freedom for the given task? So that's the key question. You can make a fancy product which amuses you in the laboratory, but if it is not geared to doing just enough for the task, if you build more in than you need, then the customer is not going to pay for the extra money that you have spent. So that's a losing product. So you build a product for the challenge it has to face, not anymore. So the 23 degrees of freedom are great for us. We would fight tooth and nail if somebody said, give me your two fingers, because we believe that we need all the 23 degrees of freedom in one hand. But for a robot, it's a different situation because the degrees of freedom, increases the complexity of the problem. The source of power is not an issue because it's anchored and it's generally indoors. Whereas for mobile robots, you have this constant issue of power management. Batteries are too big, too heavy. They last only for 2 hours. And that battery battle is going on now as electric vehicles are increasingly being pushed as a means of reducing pollution. Now, awareness of location. Now, sure, manipulators have a problem of awareness of location, but what it amounts to is knowing where the so-called end effector, that is the last piece in the arm, is, because that's what is going to make contact with, if you're welding a car, you better weld the right spot. So there is a localization issue, but because the base is anchored, it's not quite that big a problem. So localization is an issue, but it's not that big an issue as for something with no firm connection to a spot on the ground, such as mobile robots. So awareness of location is a very big issue in mobile robots. It's a problem that has not been fully solved. We are getting better and better at it, and it's based on the application. So if you have a robot that's going through a minefield, localization accuracy means something different from you and me walking through a mall. It's a completely different thing. If you wander a foot or two either side, nothing's going to happen to us. But for a mobile robot, it's the difference between surviving and being blown up in a minefield. And then, of course, when you go to humanoids, you have this problem of balance. So why do you create humanoids? Why not create four-legged robots? And the thing is this, that when you have legs, you can do things that robots with wheels and tires and tracks cannot do, because you can climb over rocks and so on. To a certain extent, you can with tracks, but there's nothing to beat legs really. You can always find a terrain which stops a regular robot, but a human being can still climb through. So that's the advantage of humanoids, apart from the ego of humans. And based on that, generally the mobile robot problem is more difficult to solve. It is the younger of the two branches of robotics. But again, if you put back that manipulator on the platform, the bottom of the two figures, then obviously the problems of both areas are now present in the same system. So robotics is very interdisciplinary. First, you have the mechanical architecture. So that could be how many tires you have, are they steerable, how far apart are they, the drivetrain, etc., etc. And then the kinematics and dynamics of motion. So we'll get into this later. Kinematics is different from dynamics. So you have to know how the thing moves. You can separate them at a very elementary level by saying that if you're moving very slowly, then the dynamics issue is not an issue. But if you're moving fast, then you have to worry about dynamics in addition to kinematics. You always have to worry about kinematics, by the way. But dynamics comes into the picture if you're moving fast. And then there's the sensors and actuators. What kind of sensors and actuators are you going to introduce in order to make the robot functional the way you want it to be? And then there is control theory, where you can take several courses, on their own in electrical engineering. But a robot needs to be controlled in some way so that it does what you want it to do. That's the same for the first area of robotics. You have to control the end effector in some way so that it gets to the target. So control theory is lingering there in the background over everything the robot does. And then, of course, we have stopped making products without software a long time ago, because software makes products so much more powerful in terms of how long it will last, the ability to enhance the software so that the product becomes better than it was when it was born. And then there's embedded systems, because a lot of this has to run very fast. The software has to run very fast. So you can't have a central computer doing everything. Sometimes you have embedded electronics in lower level parts and subsystems. So embedded systems is definitely there. And then clarifying the software, one way to say it is, just C++ and Python programming or MATLAB programming. But nowadays, AI is the buzzword. So essentially, the way you provide intelligence is through the models of AI, which are neural networks, fuzzy logic, genetic programming, swarm theory, and so on. There are 5 categories. They are known as computational intelligence. Because it's intelligence brought about by number crunching according to some model. So computational intelligence, outside of engineering, people call it AI, but we prefer, in electrical engineering, prefer to refer to it as computational intelligence. That is, you compute and you generate intelligence. Okay, the next sub-area is motion control. We already mentioned control, but typically we're talking about motion control, right? So deep down, there is a locomotion mechanism that is suited to the mission or task. So here you see a picture of one of the earlier Mars rovers, and you can see it's quite a fancy vehicle. It's got 6 wheels. Some of them are capable of independently moving up or down. I guess they think that you might have to go over a rock or something. Of course, they make sure that you never force it to go over a rock because it's fun to do. But sometimes it's unavoidable. Nothing is not planned for the Mars rover because it's like $1 billion vehicle by itself. But they do give the tires a certain amount of freedom in order to navigate small rocks. So how do you control it? The vehicle architecture, how you design the vehicle architecture is where you start, in terms of the number of wheels, the propulsion, etc. And then after that, you have to figure out a strategy for control based on your knowledge of how it's capable of moving. So the two go together. The locomotion mechanism is the system, and then you figure out a way of how you slap on control to it. For the task, you're not going to run it like a Formula One vehicle, obviously. So it's for the task. So the control is geared to the architecture, which itself is geared to fulfilling the task or mission. Now, in robotics, you'll find that typically we use 2 commands that we send to a robot. One is the forward velocity, so the straight ahead velocity, which is V in meters per second. And the other is the rotational rate or turn rate in radians per second. So V and omega is how you command the robot. Now, internally, you may have 4 drive motors or 2 drive motors or 6 drive motors, but all that is hidden to the person who commands the robot. All that is underneath. It's under the hood. So the V omega will be taken and converted to whatever the different motors have to do. But a software programmer is only responsible, maybe that person has come up with an AI program. And at the end of all that, having analyzed, the surroundings and seen where the lane lines are for a self-driving car, you then give it V and omega to keep it within the lane. And everything else happens under the hood, deep down. So that's electrical engineering underneath. But for an AI person, they're only going to give it V and omega commands, because otherwise you're not walling off people who have skills in different areas. So this was not true like 60, 70 years ago. Electrical engineers had to do everything from building the insides of a vehicle to programming it. But we've made so many modular vehicles that we've almost outsourced our way out of the business. So now in Western countries, this electrical engineering is not that popular purely because the real electrical engineering is done in the countries like India and China and Vietnam and so on. They just get the box and work with it as a box. So it's a little bit sad because you don't want to do anything to make yourself obsolete, but that's kind of happening out in the West. So computer science is a major aspect of autonomous robotics because a lot of it is hardware. And I would say the third in the totem pole are the mechanical engineers, because if you're going to build a Mars rover, then certainly mechanical engineering skills are needed. But what they're doing with self-driving cars is they're taking existing cars and converting them to self-driving cars. So there's not much for the mechanical engineer to do also, unless you're going to come up with a new vehicle. So pretty much it's a battle between electricals and computer science people right now. Okay, so robotics also involves sensing and perception. So I just dropped on the slide some of the most common basic sensors. There could be more exotic sensors, but these are the basic sensors. So you have LiDAR, which can also be three-dimensional. So you see a picture of a LiDAR there. It's probably old by now because they are much smaller now. There's also one that is missing, and that is ground radar, which one of my students worked with. The problem with LiDAR is that it tends to fail in bad weather. So Elon Musk, who owns Tesla, is completely against putting LiDAR on his cars. It's all camera based, optical camera based, because he just doesn't trust LiDAR in bad weather, like snow and heavy rain and so on. Then on the right, you see a bumblebee camera. It's a stereo vision camera. We use our two eyes to not only view the scene, but also figure out depth. So depth perception is given by our two eyes, and that's what the bumblebee camera is on the right. And then you have a GPS unit down below. That's the traditional GPS, but now you have something known as RTK, which improves your accuracy. And then you have wheel encoders, which measure the rotation of the wheels, and in the short term can enable you to project where the robot has moved since the last time you collected encoded information. And then you have the inertial measurement unit, which is useful when you have robots whose wheels do not always roll, that they may skid, like in a tank, for instance. Tanks have tracks, but you also have army vehicles where the wheels are not steerable. They call skid steer vehicles. If the tires on the right are driven faster than the tires on the left, then you kind of swing left, and the opposite if the tires on the left are driven faster than the tires on the right. So with those, measuring the rotation of the wheels is going to be very noisy and pretty much useless. So for that, you use the IMU, the inertial measurement unit, which in its most basic form has an accelerometer, three-dimensional accelerometer. It measures the acceleration along the three axes. And theoretically, if you integrate acceleration, you should get velocity. And if you integrate velocity, you should get distance, thus enabling you to figure out where the robot is. Now, it doesn't work like that in practice because it's very noisy, and it has the same problems as with trying to measure motion with wheel encoders. Eventually, it blows up, meaning that you will be lost if you depend on IMU forever. We have to, of course, define what forever means. Sometimes forever can be very short. Sometimes it can be a little bit longer. It depends on the ground conditions, etc. And then, of course, the compass gives you the heading of the robot. So that's also found on a robot. And then, with many of these sensors, you get the raw data, and you have to do some signal processing to clean it up or draw some conclusions from the data, some standard conclusions you can draw. Like if you want to take the spectrum or the Fourier transform of something, that would be considered like pretty low level and standard these days. And that's why you need signal processing, the area of signal processing for which there are separate courses. And then finally, sensing alone is great, but you really need perception. You need to make sense out of what you see. So a raw image would just be like a lineup of pixels. left to right and top to bottom, pixels meaning picture elements with different intensities. And we are so used to seeing meaning in the images that we see that we assume that computers can see it. And obviously that's not true. The computer first only gets the sensed image, and then it has to make some sense out of it. So kind of difficult, or more difficult to get a computer to do it, what we do routinely. So here is an example of perception in the context of the self-driving car. You can see that on the left, the scene has been broken down into lane lines. So that's the useful information from the sensed image for the self-driving car to then use. And then on the right, you see, this is a little bit old now, it's from Stanford. So the guy who first created a self-driving car used to work for Google. His name is Robert, I'm sorry, yeah, I think it's Thrun is his last name. I forget his first name, but Thrun is his last name, a German immigrant. And his car won the, at that time they had something called a DARPA challenge for self-driving cars. They created a course in the desert and in fake urban areas. And one of those competitions was won by him. He was the father of the first self-driving car, the Google self-driving car. And this LiDAR is three-dimensional. It gives you intensity returns. And from the intensity, you can see that things are relatively quiet on the flat surface, which is the road. And everywhere else, you see a different color, which means that from the LiDAR, they're able to separate the scene into road surfaces and other surfaces where you're not supposed to drive. So this was the early perception, probably about 15 years ago. Okay, another area is localization. So you have to localize, as I mentioned before. This is true for robot actuators as well as mobile robots. So there are two aspects to localization. So localization is often uttered along with another word, mapping. So you say localization and mapping, because the two are actually related. They are intimately related. So if you have a map, it's no good to you unless you know where you are in the map. So even if you know where you are on the surface of the earth, it doesn't help you unless you know where you are on the map that is sitting on your knees. So by the way, in the old days, you guys probably are too young, but in the old days, we used to drive around cities in America with a map spread out on our knees. One guy would be the driver and the other guy would be like a co-pilot, uh, reading the map and saying, okay, turn here, or keep going for a couple of intersections and so on. So first thing you have to do is figure out where you are on the map, and otherwise the map is useless to you. So here is the classic localization scenario, and this will connect to the topic itself when we get to it, like several classes down the road. So you need to estimate your current location and maintain it in the short term. And that I sort of analogize as counting your steps when you move. So don't take me literally, because human beings don't do this. They don't think through this way, but it's a nice way of visualizing this problem. So you count your steps. You may not count it out loud, but you have a sense of how much you're moving. So somebody may have told you in the old days, no longer, because nowadays, every phone has some kind of a mapping algorithm, like route finding algorithm. But in the old days, one of your friends would say, like maybe you're going to his house for dinner, and he would say, go roughly 5 miles past this intersection, look for a McDonald's or Udupi restaurant on the right, or go past the first Udupi restaurant, and you'll see a second Udupi restaurant, and then immediately after that, turn right. So this is how directions used to be given in the old days. So you have a sense of short-term motion, which is go approximately 5 miles past this intersection. So that I call counting steps, and that is typically done by wheel encoders or the IMU. Now, the problem with that is the uncertainty will grow as you go further and further. So if somebody said walk 100 steps, and blindfolds you and repeats that experiment, like say 25 times, you're going to end up in different places. Let's forget the fact that you might veer off the straight line. That's a different issue. But let's assume that you're guided to go in a straight line, then you will end up in different places. So that's the nature of wheel encoders and IMU based measurement. It's meant for the short term, and you better get help, because if you use it for 5 hours, you'll definitely be lost. Experiments have been tried out in the forest, and people definitely circle back. It's not something you see only in movies, but people in forests, they keep coming back to where they've already been. They think they're going straight, but they're not. Now, absolute information, I call it looking up. So counting steps and looking up. Looking up is looking around you, looking for landmarks, looking for familiar things, looking for your friend standing outside his house, waiting, to flag you down. So that's what GPS is. It can also be familiar landmarks like restaurants, but GPS is the ultimate localizer because it tells you where you are. Of course, it doesn't mean anything unless you know where you are on the map, right? So that type of information, the looking up information, was available much less frequently. It used to be once a second in the early GPS days. Sometimes it's not even available because if you go into a tunnel, GPS is blocked. Or if you go into a featureless indoor area, that means completely flat walls, a long tunnel. I mean, not a tunnel, but a corridor in a building. You won't have any features. If somebody hangs up pictures along the walls of the corridor, great. But otherwise, you don't have any features. So that's what I'm talking about. So that's why you need both counting steps as well as looking up. And it's an enormous challenge in the real world because GPS may not be available, etc. So how do you bring these two together, counting steps and looking up and finding something familiar? It's done through multi-sensor fusion. It's a technique that is born out of Bayesian theory. The Bayes theorem is one of the most fundamental theorems in probability and statistics. So it's based on that. And the manifestations of that, like using Bayesian theory for localization, finds itself, or rather leads to the definition of two techniques for actually implementing it in practice. One is Kalman filtering, and the other is known as particle filtering. And we'll get to that when we get to the topic in greater detail. So localization is important, but mapping is also important. So even if you know your location in the map, you have this problem that no map is ever final for all time to come, because there are moving objects. So other cars move in and out of the map, of your map. Google does not tell you where the other cars are because it couldn't possibly do that, right? Because that's not something that they'll be able to collect and place on the map. It's for you to do it. Also, they make mistakes. Sometimes houses that were there before are no longer there. They've even led people to their deaths. I don't want to, don't quote me because I don't want to be sued by Google. But recently there was a case where somebody took a turn, went off the bridge into the water below. They were following Google instructions, but Google had not updated their maps for that particular area. And of course, the fault ultimately is with the driver. Google is not telling you to, just depend on me 100% and close your eyes, right? You have to have a little bit of caution on your own. The two happen to be related. Localization and mapping are very much interrelated. To develop an accurate map, it's one of the hardest things to do, by the way, developing an accurate map. So accurate mapping requires accurate localization and vice versa. So they kind of, tandem partners. One requires the other. To have an accurate map, you need accurate localization. And to have a localization, you need a good map because you look at the features around you in order to figure out where you are. Now, luckily, and you can look up SLAM. I believe the original papers are referenced in either this slide set or maybe the next one. So SLAM, a guy called Hugh Durant White, I think he's an Australian, if I'm not mistaken, or could be a New Zealander, came up with two papers, SLAM 1 and SLAM 2, as to how you can do simultaneous localization and mapping. It seems counterintuitive because you think of the problem as, hey, first you got to localize yourself and then you can map, or first you got to have a map and then you can localize yourself in it. it's not really true because you can do it in an interactive manner, in a tandem manner. You localize, you map, then you move a little bit, you localize map, and so on. So it's a very interactive process of localizing yourself and developing the map. So here's the thing. I said the map is generally not 100% accurate because things could have changed, mistakes could have been made. It's also true that in many practical situations, the map is not at all available when you start. So you only have a local map, which is as far as your robot sensors can see. And then as you move, you see more and more of the terrain. And so you kind of augment the map as you go. And then you localize yourself in that map. So pretty much you have this problem that either you can't depend on the map or you're in a situation where there is no prior map. And the best examples I can give you of the latter is, in a battlefield, right? Or in an earthquake zone, no map is really, you can't have a prior map. It's just not possible because it's not valid anymore. So you have to map as you go in an earthquake area. And by the way, if you have huge flooding, it kind of wipes out, your house doesn't look the same if there's 10 feet of water, or maybe water beyond its roof, then certainly, your house does not look the same. So the map is no longer relevant. So SLAM is an iterative process for construction. Construction, if you did not have a map in the first place. Correction, if you had a map, but you're trying to make sure it's the correct map or augment it. So by the way, if you had a moving object and it was mapped, then the only way you can get rid of it is by looking at that spot and seeing that there's nothing there and wiping it off the map. And that happens all the time. You're doing it in your mind as you drive. Things are being put on the map and pulled out of it. So even though these two processes are kind of imprecise in themselves, by locking them together, you'll see when we get to the topic, it is possible to have one dependent on the other and vice versa. So you can get fairly decent accuracy if you use localization and mapping in tandem. Even though they are two imprecise processes, they can help you better each other. And I believe this is the last slide. So this is from one of our research projects back in the US, working for the Army in trying to evaluate a path planning algorithm in terms of how fast it was capable of running. So I use this to illustrate the last area, the most important area of robotics, which is cognition, which is literally the brain. How do you make this robot clever, like a human being? So it's basically higher level thinking implementation. And the best example is to use path planning. I could use an example and say, okay, let's make this robot capable of defusing a chemical bomb. But that would be so specific that it would be boring for people. However, path planning is used by all robots, right? All robots that move have to use path planning because in getting from point A to point B, they have to figure out a path, an optimal path, not just a path like a drunkard would adopt. I'm not sure whether a drunkard could get to the goal, by the way. It depends on how much he's been drinking. But you need to figure out a path. So that's the example I use. So here are two modes of path planning. The one on top, so by the way, let me set the scene for you. So the robot starts on the left, and then it has to end up where you see the robot's little, picture on the right. So this is a long hall where we have created a switchback. Switchback is where you block the path alternately left and right so that the robot is forced to, go left and then right, and then, it's called a zigzag for obvious reasons. So on the left, we don't have a map until your sensors see things in the environment. So it heads out to what it thinks is the target, not it thinks, it's been given a target spot, it starts going towards that. We would too, human beings would do the same thing. And then as it approaches the first obstacle or fence, it sees the obstacle and then it says, let me go along the fence because obviously, I can't penetrate the fence, unless you have a tank. So you're not allowed to push the fence over. So it starts going along. The path planning algorithm actually dictates this. Why doesn't it go left? It's because it's able to see that on the left you have a wall. So it's closed off on the left. The path planning algorithm guides it right. through the opening, and then it runs into the second fence. Doesn't literally run into it, but it spots the second fence and then zigs left, and then it does a final zag to the right, and it reaches the destination. On the other hand, if you have a map, you still have to correct it. You're still responsible for correcting it. But since you have a map, even though you can't see the first fence, you start to head for the opening. So that's what cognition is. It's smart action, right? So this is what a smart person would do. If you have a map, you would head for the opening, and the robot heads for the opening. So by the way, this is a simulation, but we actually ran a real robot on the same course just to confirm that our simulation results were backed up. And so it's a much shorter path, and we are really evaluating the path planning algorithm. So we'll get to that when we get to the cognition part of this course. All or most path planning algorithms are based on graph theory, with the Dijkstra algorithm, being the oldest algorithm based on graph theory. It's one of those things that if you do, you're going to be remembered forever, and Dijkstra is. So we'll get to that when we reach that topic. So, Professor Abraham, do we take a break for a few minutes, or do we continue?
I think we can continue because it's an online session, and I think it'll be okay. Do you want to? If you want to break, then maybe we can break for 5 minutes and then come back.
No, I'm going to take a sip of water and continue. So I'm going to pause for a minute. Yeah, and I will put up the second. I'll start sharing the second one.
Yeah. So we can leave the screen on and the recording on. We can take a 5-minute breather and then you can start.
Yeah. So right now you cannot see the second one. So I'm going to reshare it. The second PowerPoint is what I meant. Yeah. Okay, I'm sharing the second one. Can you see it? There'll be a small delay.
Yeah, it's up. I can
part
see
B,
it.
right?
Yeah. Okay. So, no, I still see part A.
Really? Huh.
I think you.
Maybe I clicked to the wrong one.
Yeah.
Okay, let me stop sharing. And then share. This is part 2. No? What do you see? I don't know why
Can you go to the second? Can you go to the second slide, because it says introduction part A in the first slide.
Okay.
Maybe in the second. Maybe there was a typo in the.
Yeah, maybe.
Can you go to the second slide?
Actually, I'll close down the first one. Let's try one more time. Yeah, this is part B.
Yeah, now it's part B.
See? Yeah, even your daughter knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do apologize. All right. Yeah.
Okay, so just give me a minute. I'll just take a couple of sips of water.
Sure.
Okay, so we're looking at part B now. I put it in data mode. Okay, here it is. So these are the motivational applications. It has a lot of video material, and we can't go through all of them, but all the links are available, so you should be able to run them on your own. I'll pick the most important, in order to make certain points. So I collect these over the years, and obviously some of them become older, and then you find more fancy stuff, and you replace the older ones. Okay, so now we're looking at slide 2. So this is an application that really grabs me. This is apparently work in Israel and Switzerland. So the idea is that they're going to introduce. They are working on introducing nano robots into the human bloodstream. So you'll be surprised at how long the average blood vessels are in a human being. So I Googled it just once, so we probably have to confirm it. It said 60,000 miles, if I remember right. 60,000 miles? How do you get that much of blood vessels into a human being? But apparently there's so much crisscrossing going on that it adds
One
up
second.
to 60,000 miles.
Okay, class resume பண்ணிட்டாங்க. I will join it later. Okay, நான் one bye.
Was that?
I think accidentally somebody unmuted themselves. I think it's okay.
Okay, all right. So 60,000 miles of blood vessels, right? The reason I bring this up is we are talking about localization, right? And mapping. So if you're going to introduce nanobots there, the idea is that it's going to go somewhere, maybe take some pictures, maybe even deliver some drugs. It's a futuristic concept. And I would think that since different people are different in terms of how their arteries are, you would need some kind of mapping, localization, path planning, etc., to get a robot to go somewhere. And you would have the same issues. You would need to count your steps, and then you would have to have some confirmation on a less regular basis of where you are inside the body. So it's obviously well, maybe a decade still away, but I thought it was a fascinating um, piece of research. And this is in the same lines that there are very few extremely good doctors in the world, because that's the natural Gaussian distribution in life. There are very few Tendulkars. uh, you know because that's how it is. If everybody was like a Tendulkar or a Steve Smith, or pick any field and the best person in that area, Elon Musk, in rocketry, that would be an unusual world, really. So if you want to distribute the talent of surgeons all over the world, then you have to come up with something like this, where you can do remote surgery, where the real surgeon, meaning that the expert surgeon, is in a central location, and thousands of miles away there are people who assist, but it's really the expert surgeon who's doing the surgery with the help of robot actuators on the other side, and feedback to him. And one of the most important things is haptic feedback. When you cut something, the reason you don't cut deeper or don't cut deep enough is because you get this feedback from the person's body, right? So you have to somehow convey that to a person thousands of miles away. Otherwise, he's not going to be, or she is not going to be that effective in doing surgery. Also, there's magnetic endoscopy, where I believe it's a capsule that sent up the intestines. So this is like a short trip compared to the 60,000 miles I was talking to you about. But again, you want to know where it is, and get it to do its thing exactly where it's supposed to do it, and not somewhere else. So this is example that I always use. The drug dosages we are given is a wild guess, really, because I believe adults and children are separated in terms of the dosage, but not all males are the same weight. Not all women are the same weight, and men are different from women. And sometimes when you sprain your knee, uh, and if you could possibly deliver drugs to that spot, it's going to be much more effective, because when we swallow a pill, a lot of it is washed out even before it gets to the spot. So there are all kinds of implications if you can send nanobots into the body and target the delivery of drugs, or even time target it, meaning that you don't want the dumping of the entire dosage, but maybe you want a slow release pill or something. So all of that can be done with nanobots of the future. So this one I have to play. I hope you can see it. But if it flips to a different screen, then I'm going to have to stop sharing and share. I don't think so. Yeah, enjoy.
So we can't hear the
Oh, okay.
audio.
Wait, hold on a second. Maybe there's something special I need to do to share audio.
Yeah,
I remember
I think
there's a
so.
problem. Yeah, I remember there's a problem with sharing even on other platforms. If anybody has a clue, let me know. So there must be in the sharing process. So I'm going to stop sharing and reshare.
No, I think you can go to the audio settings, and in the audio settings, you can change the audio source to, I think, the screen.
So the audio settings, would that be on the original, yeah, the Teams page, or where would it be? Or would it be in that little box that shows up that now has your picture on it? Let's see, more.
It would be right next to the camera, I suppose. In between, I think, apps and camera, you have more actions, and in more actions, I think you have audio settings.
More actions, record and transcribe, meeting info, video effects, language and speech, settings, right? Device
Yeah.
settings.
I think you would have audio settings in between those. I don't know.
I
have
don't.
Oh, okay.
So I remember it from Blackboard that it is in the act of sharing, you have to say share audio also.
Oh,
So perhaps that's what it is, because I'm opening up more and it says record and transcribe, meeting info, video effects. Is it video effects? Maybe?
could
Maybe
be.
it is. No, that's not it. So
Uh,
what if I turn on my speaker for this? Then they'll be able to hear it, I think. Shall we do that?
I think so. Yeah,
Okay,
I think we can give it a try.
Okay, hold on a second. I got to start again. Are you still seeing my shared screen?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can still see the
Okay.
same screen.
Let me pull it back. Let's try it now.
Scientists love studying ants.
Yeah, I can hear.
Known
Yeah,
for their
good.
impressive strength, ants can lift over 100 times their own weight. Here, a swarm of ants works together as a team to move a giant millipede. With no space to grab onto, the ants make strong chains by grabbing onto each other. Here at Stanford University, we're interested in learning about how tiny things move objects much larger than themselves. Using a special adhesive inspired by gecko toes, our microrobots can move objects over 2,000 times their own weight. The question is, like ants, can our robots work together to accomplish great things? Some microrobots, like these, move forward in jerky jolts. Their forces are strong but short, like the quick beat of a drum, so they don't overlap much and don't work well together. 20 robots only apply 2 times the force of a single robot. Running robots like this one apply forces over a longer period of time. Although the forces individually aren't very strong, they overlap with each other more easily, so teamwork is better. After a series of experiments, we found that the best way for robots to work together as a team was to use a very long, very slow, but very steady winching gait, like our team of micro robots here. With near perfect teamwork and impressive individual strength, this team of 6 microtugs, weighing only 100 grams, moved the author's unmodified 3,900-pound, 1,800 kilogram, car and driver, shown here at 20 times speed.
Okay. You're able to hear, right?
Yeah, we were.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide.
Scientists love
On that slide. Okay, so that is an area called biomimetics. We often look for guidance from nature and then try to make a computer take on the same attributes, because nature is a good place to learn. But obviously the problem is that animals don't talk to you, and sometimes the animals don't even never lived in the same era as a human being. So here's an example of a dinosaur, which dinosaurs became extinct before the first human being. And the idea here is again, I think from Stanford or one of the elite schools. The idea is to make that little truck have a long tail because it was surmised that the dinosaurs used it when they jumped off like a short cliff, right? 10, 15 feet to prevent themselves from overbalancing. They use that tail and the distribution of weight by moving the tail around in order to keep themselves, aligned. So this is from a research paper several years ago. So we're going to play this also. And again, you'll be able to hear the audio through my computer pickup. Are you able to see? No, you can't. Hold on. I don't think you can.
We are exploring.
Just a second, because it's now going to my browser.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, right. I think you'll have to share the browser.
Yeah, so I got to stop sharing and share the browser. Okay, share. Can you see my browser?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
All right, picture yourself inside a robotic suit, one that lets you pick up, say, huge, heavy objects, just like a superhero. This is really a thing. Robotic exoskeletons, as they're called, are being used on the floor of hardware stores, also other places like that, so workers can lift heavier loads, and they're
Hold on a second. I'm
controlled
having difficulty.
by those workers' movements. But the more advanced exoskeletons
Yeah, I think-
are controlled by the mind, and they can help
There's something
paralyzed
playing in the
people,
background.
even
Just a
children,
second,
walk. NPR's Elise Hu has been checking all this out for her video series Future You about how emerging technologies could change life as we know. And Elise is back with us. Hey, Elise.
Good morning.
Just to be clear, this kind of stuff I'm talking about, this exists.
Just a second,
today.
guys. I'm
Yeah,
trying
and the
to.
most promising ones of these exoskeletons are powered with thought control, as you mentioned, which
I don't know where the sound is coming from. There are a couple of windows playing, so I'm just trying to get organized here. So hold on. I hate it when you only have one monitor. I like normally to have multiple monitors. So
Yeah,
I'm
so you can
having,
just share a monitor. Yeah.
yeah. So just a second as I try to figure out what happened to the original. Oh God, I don't want that. Okay, we'll have to go through the obligatory ad. All right, so we got the idea. So let me stop sharing this and go back to the PowerPoint. I wanted to show this in more fully than some of the others because I think it's high end in terms of its potential and the complexity of the application. So let me share the PowerPoint again.
I think we lost Sir. We'll just wait a few minutes by allow him to rejoin.
Hello, is everyone there?
Yeah,
Hello? Nobody said
Yeah.
anything. So, okay, so you were able to see that, right? The first video.
Yeah. Are you sharing something? Hello. Yeah, I think we lost him again.
So I don't know what's happening. My bandwidth is great, but I'm getting kicked out for some reason.
Oh, you're back now.
Yeah, let me go back to the PowerPoint again. So
Yeah.
I I don't know how much of my I wonder whether I'm being timed out somehow because it looks like it's kicking me out.
No, I think as soon as you start sharing, I think you're getting disconnected. I don't know why that is. It shouldn't happen.
Okay.
Can you try sharing just the PPT?
Yeah.
Yeah, now we are back.
Okay. So I was saying that this is an older, video, same application. So I'll let you watch it on your own. Now, I wanted to just go to the next slide. Okay. So these two, let's watch this a little bit. Luckily, I don't have to go off screen. So this is from Boston Dynamics, which is one of the best robotics companies in the world. So this is a humanoid robot. And that's a remarkable control system that you're seeing. Walking on snow is not easy for many of us, particularly as we get older. So right now it's a curiosity because they haven't found something it can do that is useful for society. It's a curiosity, but I guess the applications are still to come. See, that's an elite control system. That's not something that can be done in the course of an afternoon. And I guess that's the application they are looking towards, some kind of Amazon warehousing task where they get rid of all human beings, I guess. I'm joking, but that's obviously the intent of many of these robots.
Sir, should you just hold on? I kind of muted you because there was a feedback, and now I'm unable to unmute you. So could you just a second?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so one of the things you may have noticed, is that they have reduced the degrees of freedom, the wrist and fingers, because, human beings may disagree. They are generally unnecessary for many tasks. So they've just given it a wrist as it picks up the boxes and shelves it. As I said, I went in and out, so I don't know how much of what I said was picked up by everyone. They're trying to create these warehousing robots. The idea is to get rid of human beings. Hopefully, they find other jobs for us. But that's the idea, that Amazon, will run a warehouse completely with robots and maybe a couple of human beings. So this one I'll let you watch on your own. It's the same robot, the Boston Dynamics robot. I don't know what that particular robot is called. So it does an amazing backflip. A backflip, a robot doing a backflip. It's one of the most complicated things that a human being does, and most of us cannot even do it. And they get this robot to do a backflip off a table. No, so all that is fine, right? It's fun to watch them on YouTube. But these are the two questions that have to be answered if you want to put them to use. And one is, you need more finger dexterity in many applications. So right now it's very crude in the way it picks up stuff. It's okay for warehousing, but if you want to interact with a human being, then you probably need to use the fingers, shake hands, and so on. But more than that, there has to be a way of interaction between the human and the robot that is not based on code, because that's not the way we interact with each other. So that aspect is missing, and it's a separate branch of research, human to robot interaction. How to make robots so that they behave like us, not the wheeled robots, but typically the humanoids and the ones on four legs. Oh yeah, this is the backflip here.
This
So
is
as you can
Atlas,
see,
I think.
what's that?
This is Atlas. Its name Atlas, I think.
Atlas. Yeah. I think it's Atlas. Yeah, I remember now.
Decade
Yeah.
of
Thank you.
hydraulic humanoid robotics work at Boston Dynamics. Atlas stands about 5 feet tall, weighs about 190 pounds. It's battery powered and hydraulically actuated with 28 degrees of freedom. It has RGB cameras and depth sensors, which provide input to its control system, and all of the computation
How many of us
required
can do
for
that?
control, perception, and estimation happens on
Okay,
board.
I'll speak only for myself. I can't.
Parkour is a useful organizing activity for our team because it highlights several challenges that we believe to be important. First, how do we build a high power density mobile robot that's capable?
Okay, so you get the picture. So the point is, people don't have time to burn in funding them unless you can turn it into money some way. So it's kind of a nice curiosity, but they might just about to be able to turn the corner in terms of making it produce the revenue stream. Because otherwise, people, even investor capitalists, will not fund forever. So this is the four-legged version. You can watch it. It's quite funny actually, because there's human beings in this video that try to kick it, but maybe you'll watch a little bit of it. That's what I meant. Okay, we get the idea. I definitely want to show you this. It'll play. So that's a real child. It's not at all. You can see, if you look at her eyes, and I guess the hand of the adult is kind of calming the child. So swarm robots, they line up 5 by 5, I think, but I think it's one robot shot because maybe wasn't working on that day. So the color indicates the team color. Red, blue, yellow, and red again. Yeah. And it'll change color the moment it locks on. Yeah, there. Blue and blue, yellow and yellow, red and red. And then we'll have red and red here. So this is a very difficult project, even at a master's level for a course, in connection with a course. It's not easy to do, though it looks easy. And it doesn't matter who has done it and posted something on the internet. When you do it yourself, you have your own special problems to overcome. So it looks like we'll be one robot short. That robot is probably taking the day off, though they're not supposed to be human beings, who are the ones who love days off. So some guidance is involved. I'm not sure what system they use, but it has to find that hook receptacle. And yes, we have shot one robot today. Looks like that robot changed his mind at the last minute. So obviously they've designed the clothing of the child so that it's easy to grab onto. If you have an earthquake zone and there are people lying injured, their clothes are not going to be the same, I would think. And you see the child is being dragged to safety. So a nice application. I don't remember. So you can see it's very crude, it's just going through the motions, but a human massage therapist will be so much better. And even wiping the face, the patient has to cooperate by moving the neck and head around. And there might be a paraplegic that is unable to move the neck and head. Okay, you get the idea. Well, haircut, I don't know how many of us are ready to get a haircut from a robot. All right. So I found this very interesting. This, I think it was an IEEE Spectrum magazine. And you can see what is being done here is it's much easier to get a robot to copy what you're doing. It's much harder to invest autonomous intelligence into it. So human beings can show how to do something, and if the robot can imitate it, then you can address situations such as after the Japanese tsunami, you had a particular nuclear reactor that was submerged or flooded, and they had to turn off certain valves and take care of some kind of partial cleanup, etc., etc., etc. And the idea is that if a human being could show a robot what to do, like grab onto a doorknob and open it, then it's much easier for the robot to do that. If the robot has to identify the doorknob and figure out what to do, it's on its own, it's much more difficult. So the HMI, I think, stand for human machine interface. I could be wrong, but this video is an endless loop, and I think we have seen enough. So the human being is wearing a patch that picks up the contractions of the muscles and transmits it to the robot. So this is the same thing. The fellow on the left is a human being, obviously, and he can pretend to be wielding an axe, maybe smashing a door down within a nuclear power plant or something, some emergency process. And by doing that in a safe area, the robot can copy what he's doing. So essentially, you don't ask the robot to be intelligence on its own. You just ask the robot to follow your instructions. Yeah, you can watch this on your own. This is the same concept of sending tiny robots into the body. This is very experimental. You'll see little tiny things that are jumping around on a little diaphragm, a platform, by vibrations. So the idea is that by vibrations, they can, no batteries or anything, just by vibrations, they're going to get this tiny robot, 3D printed robot, to move within the body to wherever you want it to go. Now this again, you can watch on your own. It shows one of the early wheelchairs that can climb stairs. So in the US, you have something known as the ADA, I think it's the American Disability Act, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a law that was passed several decades ago, and it forces all buildings to be compliant. So you have to have wheelchair access. Every building that is new has to have it. Every building that is old has a certain amount of time before it's also forced to comply. So it is a law that enables somebody who's completely disabled in a wheelchair to be able to go and move along the rim of the Grand Canyon, if you know what that is. It's Grand Canyon is one of the great attractions in the US. And so they've created this 3 or 4 mile walkway right next to the top of the canyon, so that people can walk or like drive around in their wheelchairs. So obviously climbing stairs is a major problem, right? Flat ground is okay. The human being can actually control it if he or she has use of their hands and has a joystick. But climbing is like a dangerous thing because you can't allow any mishaps. So this video actually shows that the wheelchair can climb in a controlled manner. It's not going to come rolling down, because something went wrong. So that's that last step of being totally foolproof is preventing the product from coming to market, because there are all kinds of legal loopholes, or not loopholes, but legal requirements that have to be crossed in the US and in Western countries before such a product is deployed, because of the potential danger to the people who use it. Now, these are 2 videos of self-driving truck companies. I remember I told you earlier that that the big 18-wheeler being self-driving is a much easier problem to solve than passenger cars. And it's purely because most of the time they're going long distance on the freeways. And typically they stay in the right lane. In the US, here it would be the left lane, the leftmost lane rather. So again, they're being monitored. And the idea is that if they are in trouble, then help will be sent. But typically, they would pull them over to the side. The model involves human navigation at the 2 ends. So before so the human being actually merges with the freeway, like it takes the on-ramp and merges with the freeway, and then it becomes autonomous, and the human being, goes home. And the reason is, labor is costly there. So labor is the biggest cost often. At the other end, when you have reached your destination after driving hundreds of miles, a human being again comes and enables the truck to exit on the off-ramp and drive within the city to the warehouse, which is again the most difficult part for a self-driving car. All right, so this, I introduced some examples for medical robotics, that it's a specialized area of robotics, both of these slides. And that's where we are. It'll be nice to answer some questions. I don't know whether we are set up for that, but I'm more than happy to address any questions you may have. Don't get me going, because I often start to philosophize. And
yeah, I think we are set up for answering. Yeah, we are set up for answering questions, or asking questions rather. The students can ask any questions that they want. Okay. So they can unmute themselves and they can ask.
Okay.
Anybody has any questions that they would like to ask?
Yeah, don't be shy. Maybe they went for Sunday lunch.
I think there's a shy. Yeah, I think Arvind has a question. Yeah, Arvind, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. So during your discussion, you were telling me how a LiDAR is limited in its abilities when it's coming to bad weather situation. But then what I had learned before is that the other alternatives such as cameras for using in autonomous vehicles, it's even worse than LiDAR. So what's your take on that? Is it
Well,
better to have a LiDAR than a camera? Or
so I wouldn't say worse, because the physics of the LiDAR fails when you have heavy snow and when you have shiny surfaces. Now, maybe the latest technology is overcoming that, but my knowledge of LiDARs is when you have a chrome bumper, right? A fender, a bumper. I guess I'm using the right terminology. The car ahead has a shiny, metal bumper or something like that. The LiDARs are not very good with those. And now cameras are like the substitute for our eyes, right? And just like LiDAR, you can have several of them for redundancy. You can have multiple cameras. Now, one thing is we should tone down our expectations of a machine. Even human beings in pouring rain, they can't but pull over and wait for the rain to stop. So I've seen that often in Western countries. When it really, really rains or really snows hard, people pull over and wait uh, because there's no problem that has like 100% solution. Uh, the difference with machines is they never get tired, unlike human beings. So if the conditions are good, they will go all night if necessary, right? And a guy like Elon Musk, he specifically forbids LiDAR usage on any design, any Tesla design. So, he's known to be an opinionated guy, but I think on this count, he's on to something. So what happens is, if you take the easy way out, which is what LiDAR appears to be, easy way out is because it appears to precisely give you perception. The LiDAR ray bounces off an object and returns a distance, and most of the time you can rely on it. And then you have 360 LiDAR rays, like if you have 360 LiDAR rays spaced 1 degree apart, you've covered the entire world around you. So it seems so attractive when things are going good. It's a question of, what happens when it fails. And so cameras are similar to human eyesight in bad weather, or the human being is getting old. It's similar to that. So it may not be perfect, but the cameras themselves won't fail. And of course, if there's water rolling off the lens, you have a problem. But human beings figure out a way of, of seeing through rain, even when water is pouring off our head, down our forehead. So they'll have something like that, so long as you can keep the lens clear, it has a shot of deconstructing the scene. So that's my take on it. When the basic physics fails, that's a totally different thing. Now, the solution is in redundancy, because human beings have a lot of redundancy. As we drive, we're getting more information than we really need to solve the problem. And that's why some of us text while driving, which we should not. But because, there's so much information that we feel totally in control of the situation. And that is what is going to solve this problem. For the self-driving car, you got to have a lot of sensors so that you have more information than you need. But secondly, you need to go to a different model. So this is the model where the car sees things around it, right? There is another model that is harder to implement because of the laws, the infrastructure of laws that are already there, and that's vehicle-to-vehicle communication. In other words, every vehicle, through some kind of wireless scheme, maybe it's based on cell phone hopping between car to car. I'm not a wireless person, so I don't know much about that part of it. But if you could set up a vehicle-to-vehicle communication where every car tells every other car where it is, you got the problem solved. You don't need LiDAR anymore. But then you got to figure out what you want to do with that information, because obviously it's only the cars around you that are important. You don't need to know what a car 100 meters away is where it is located. So that's the model that will instantly make this idea workable, except that there's issues of privacy and of creating the wireless communication infrastructure. Privacy is a big thing in the US. They seem to panic at the slightest idea that somebody is using their cell phone or broadcasting their position of the car. There's not much thought given to that. It's automatic. No, I'm not going to be a part of that kind of a thing. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but really Tesla
Yes,
cars
sir.
work purely with optical cameras, just optical cameras. So which are the regular cameras? Maybe if you add infrastructure, infrared and so on, you could get them to be even better. Infrared cameras, I mean. And one of my students, he's from VIT actually. He did his PhD with one of my colleagues. He was focusing on ground radar. So ground radar compared to LiDAR is has some pros and cons. You know, I wouldn't trust to my memory, but what I remember from reading about it is that it has less of an inclination to fail in bad weather. On the other hand, a ground radar image has to be seriously processed before you figure out what it is trying to tell you. So ground radar seems to be like a good compromise, you know. They are installing this ground radar in many cars. Test cars, you know, obviously. There's no real self-driving car on the road right now. So we need
Okay, sir. Thank
vehicle-to-vehicle
you.
communication. We absolutely need that. And there's too many hurdles to overcome right now to get that. Any other question? Hey, once again, while I take this call, Professor Abraham, hello?
Yeah, yeah, sure, sir.
3 மணிக்கு வரீங்களா? எங்க இருக்கீங்க இப்ப? சரி. ரெடி, நான் ரெடி. 3 மணிக்கு ரெடி. Bye. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Anybody? Any more questions? Is there anybody there?
Yeah. I guess everybody's very shy today.
Or it's a Sunday afternoon mood.
Oh, everybody should be fine. So I guess we'll wind up the session for today. And one thing that I want to mention is so if you look at the schedule for especially for the students, if you look at the schedule, Sir's second module was supposed to be on basics of Ubuntu and ROS 1, especially introduction to ROS 1 and a few basic commands and things like that. So since Clay has taken a lot of it during the week that he was here, he gave a very good introduction to Ubuntu, and he also gave introduction to ROS 2, which has specific command sets which are very different from ROS 1. Things are fundamentally very different from ROS 1 and ROS 2, but that shouldn't be an issue. So what I'll do is for those of you who missed, I think the MTech students, they missed the session. I'll put up the videos. I think the video files are already up. I'm not sure. I'll cross verify and I'll get back to you. Or at the very least, by today evening, all the files should be up. So the links to those will be available. So you can go through those. And on Wednesday, I believe during the extramural hours when Sir will address you physically in TT 501, he'll kind of go through how he works with MATLAB and ROS 1 to do certain stuff that that we did when Clay was here. Like, for example, teleoperating a TurtleBot or doing a operation using TurtleBot. Somebody just raised a hand. Okay.
I'm back now. I don't know what happened, but somebody put me on a hold and then kicked me out.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That must be Blesson. I think Blesson kicked me out.
No, I didn't do that.
I think it was
Alright,
too
so-
boring, right? The talk was too boring. So less than
No,
editorial charge.
No, sir, never.
All right, so like I was telling the students, so when you come back on Wednesday, you'll
Yeah.
kind of integrate how you'll kind of walk them through how to integrate MATLAB and ROS and how to do basic navigation using a turtlebot from the MATLAB or using a MATLAB program rather.
Yeah, so
So,
that's the plan for Wednesday. And then we can get into the kinematics and dynamics a little bit later. Like we can, typically this is a better plan that you start working with the software rather than have hours of theory. So we'll just jump into the pool on Wednesday by firing up ROS and starting to move the turtlebot in Gazebo.
All right then. So I want to thank everybody for joining in. And one more thing that I wanted to mention, we do have systems in TT501 which you can use, like you have seen. Most of you would have seen TT501 when you came for the class on 3rd and 4th. However, if any of you want to work with your laptops, you can come to TT501 tomorrow morning with a pen drive which is at least 64 GB, and I'll copy the image and I'll give it to you, and we'll explain how to set it up so that you can be ready when you come on Wednesday, so that you can use your own laptops, because some of the systems there are a little slow, especially when it comes to integrating ROS1 and MATLAB. So things are a little tricky when you're using the systems which are already there in 501. So if you want to use your laptops, if the laptop is an i5 laptop with at least 4 cores or more and at least 16 GB RAM, if that's the case, things should work very fine. And if it's an SSD, all the better. So if you have a good laptop and you want to use it, you're more than welcome. You can bring a pen drive on Monday morning to TT501. I'll give you the image that you can, and I'll tell you how to set it up. And you guys can use your laptops for the whole semester. All right then. So if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank Mohan sir for taking the class online, even though there were some issues. And I want to thank everybody for joining in on a Sunday morning. All right. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, sir.
Okay, you're welcome. I'll see
Yeah,
you tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye-bye.